first of all, within the mainstream academic field of philosophy of mind, there are more and more thinkers who claim that the better analogy of the brain is not as a generator of consciousness, but as more like a radio receiver of consciousness. I mean, unpacking that, would be quite a long conversation. But the idea that we have both our evolutionary psychology that comes from our bodies. I would say that the brain does create certainly some of our conscious awareness. Some of our reactions are, based on evolutionary adaptations and evolutionary psychology as a field. Of course, it claims to explain everything, and in that sense, it's not credible. But some of the things they do explain are absolutely, I would say, right. But then there's another kind of consciousness, at least another kind, many different kinds. But one is what we might call cultural consciousness. And this, again, goes back to the worldviews that we talked about at the beginning of our conversation, whereby these worldview structures are made out of joint commitments and agreements. Like language is a great analogy, right? So there are physical sounds coming out of our mouths that are the physical part of language, but the major corpus of language consists of agreements about what the words mean. And those agreements, they don't exist entirely in my mind, and they're not entirely subjective, nor are they entirely objective. They're not just physical things. They're what are known as the intersubjective. So we're positing kind of a new metaphysical category. So there's the objective, the interiority of your mind. There's the subjective, the interiority of your mind, the objective, the extended physical world of things. And then there's this intersubjective, which is this space in between subjective awareness where actual systems, intersubjective systems form, right? So that system could be something as simple as the agreement about the meaning of a word, or it could be a multi-generational, large-scale structure like a religion or modernity or post-modernity. As I argue in my 2020 book, Developmental Politics, these worldview structures can be understood as the basic units of cultural evolution. And so they're like think of this kind of invisible intersubjective system. It doesn't have a mind of its own, right? It doesn't have a sensitive center like our subjective consciousness, but it does have a systemic metabolism, if you will, of values. And it persists across generations, and it gives people identity, it gives them a frame of values, it gives them reference to the world, and it's a kind of, best understood as a kind of cultural consciousness that interpenetrates our brain. Most of us receive these forms of cultural consciousness from the family that we grow up in, but now in our current societal state where there's these three major worldviews in play, right, vying, lots of kids, they grow up in a traditional religious household, and then in college they're converted to progressive postmodernism, right? And so they bring on a new kind of cultural consciousness online. And these cultural systems are kind of fighting each other. They're in a dialectical relationship with each other, which is both good and bad. That's how they emerge. That's how they create a larger structure. But it also means that there's these kind of permanent conflicts, and being able to harmonize these conflicts without just kind of pushing the whole thing into one. You've got to preserve the challenge. I talked about polarities, right? The polarity exists between modernity and postmodernity, and it existed right from the beginning of America between traditionalism and modernity. So these conflicts are built in, but they can be managed more or less well in a relationship of challenge and support. They make both poles better. But when you don't have any challenge and support, or it's all challenge and no support, then obviously things fly apart, and we have the culture war that makes effective governance nearly impossible at the moment.